All right, welcome everybody. So we've already got the first 35 people in, but it's not quite time yet. Aaron's already here with me. So I thought while we're waiting for everybody to come, so the last few minutes before we start, I'm just going to show a couple of photos from our trip that we did last year. So Aaron is really well known for his Timor-Leste Below series, which is a scuba zoo series in 8 parts that covers all the amazing underwater experiences you can have in Timor-Leste, which is one of the newest countries in the world. So we decided to run a trip there together to bring people there. We had a nice group of 14 people, and yeah, we were looking for all kinds of things that the ocean has on offer. It was really, really nice experience. We had lots and lots of dolphins. We had, in one instance, we had several thousand dolphins around, spinner dolphins, and they did all kinds of acrobatics right around our boat. You can see here, and even below the boat. So we're hanging off the boat with the dolphins right below us. It was really a special experience. But we were actually here to see blue whales, and blue whales we did see. So this was the first blue whale we actually saw. Aaron almost crashed his drone in the water to get this shot. This was the very first blue whale we had, which was a mother and a calf, we think, but we only ever saw the mother properly. And later we got some underwater time with them even, so it was a really, really good experience that we had last year. And now we're very much hoping that Timor-Leste together with Indonesia will open up so we can go there this year in October. So I'm just going to wait like a couple more minutes until everybody's here. We've already got 45 people, 46 people now. So I'm just going to give a quick introduction about Insider Divers, and then we can start with Aaron Gekoski in this talk. So welcome everybody to this talk about documenting animal cruelty by Aaron Gekoski. Just a couple words, if you don't know us, about Insider Divers. We are a company that organize primarily scuba diving trips, both land-based and liveaboard. We do also specialized trips like wreck trips or free diving trips. So Timor was a lot of free diving with whales and dolphins and manatees, dugongs. And we also do photography workshops. So we do very specialized trips, and they're always group trips. So we're always in groups of, let's say, 5 to 15, sometimes 20 people in a group. There's always at least one expert. So this last trip to Timor, we had Aaron there, and I was there as well. So we were 2 experts, if you will. And we always have somebody there that will make sure that the itinerary is special and unique, and you will learn a lot more from it. So we always try to help with educating ourselves and our guests. And that's why in this period where we were all stuck at home, I started this thing called Insider Academy, which is essentially a series of webinars, because I thought when everybody's stuck at home, we've got lots of time. So since March, we've been running lots of webinars. We're already over 20, almost 25 webinars, which you can all find on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, Insider Divers. So you can just type in youtube.com/Insider Divers, and you'll find lots and lots of different talks. That's also where we will put Aaron's talk tomorrow or the day after. So have a look there if you haven't heard of all these webinars. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Aaron for this amazing talk. Hang on a second. I'm just going to make the screen bigger. Hi, Aaron. How's it going?
Hey, Simon. How you doing?
Yeah, good.
Thank you for the intro.
Yeah, well, I didn't say anything about yourself because I think you're going to intro yourself.
I am indeed.
So I didn't give anything away. But yeah, everybody meet Aaron. Yeah, you can take over the screen if you like.
Now I have to warn everyone that I'm a complete technophobe. So Simon's been giving me lessons on how to use this whole Zoom palaver. I can barely use Skype. So, this is actually quite a weird experience for me, having to give a presentation in this way. Because normally when you give presentations to people, of course, you're doing it in big groups, and you can gauge people's interest and you can interact with people. So to be presenting to myself on a screen when there's people around the world watching is well, I guess it's the new normal, isn't it? So yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope everyone is staying safe and life is getting back to as normal as it can be. Today, my talk is going to be all about human-animal conflict, specifically with reference to some of the jobs that I've been on down the years, and also particularly looking at photography. I know that there's a lot of photographers here, so I'm going to try and talk people through some of my thought processes when I approach different assignments and different shoots, and hopefully, there'll be some take-home points that you'll be able to use to maybe improve your photography. And as Simon said, I'll be available for any questions at the end. I hope everyone has a drink ready. This is mine. This is a gin and raspberries. I promise you it's actually quite good. Some of the issues that we're going to be discussing today are, I wouldn't say it's exactly uplifting. I'll do my best not to get too despondent and depressed about it, because it can be quite easy when covering these sorts of jobs to get pretty depressed about it all, because after all, we are in unprecedented times, particularly with regards to wildlife. I'm actually in Bali at the moment, recovering from a nasty bout of pneumonia, which has taken me a couple of months. Sometimes this job can kind of take its toll on you. And I've spent, it's a decade now, traveling around the world and working on these issues. And it takes its toll sometimes on your mental and physical health. So, but hopefully I'm getting back to normal now, hence why I'm drinking gin. So without further ado, let's get into the presentation. Globally, animals are being traded, used, abused, consumed to the point that we are in the midst of a sixth mass extinction. Over the past 500 million years, there have been 5 mass extinction events. They're always caused by natural phenomena such as volcanoes, but this is the first time that a mass extinction has ever been caused by another species. And that species is us. We are the single most destructive species to ever walk the planet. And because of mankind, we have lost over half of the world's wildlife in the past 40 years. I did tell you that this would be a really cheerful chat, didn't I? I promise you it will get better. Actually, that's a complete lie. It won't get any better at all. So that includes 23% of all mammal species that are at risk, and 30,000 species that go extinct every single year. And the final sobering statistic is that it's predicted that at the current rate that half of all species will be extinct by the start of the next century. So what are some of the reasons behind this? Well, the primary reason is habitat loss. And there just simply isn't enough space to fit 7.5 billion people and all of the animals that inhabit the planet. So as we manage to clear forest and we manage to make room for human populations, inevitably that causes a lot of conflict with animals. I actually lived in Borneo for 4 or 5 years, and that's almost a microcosm of of human-animal conflict and the deforestation problems that we're seeing globally. In Borneo, they have lost half of their rainforests in the past 25 years alone. And as the rainforests go, we're coming into increasing contact with orangutans. I'm going to speak more about orangutans shortly. So some of the other reasons behind some of the other sources of human-animal conflict are overexploitation. This is another area that I'm going to be delving into in more detail. That can take the form of poaching, it can take the form of overfishing, it can be hunting, it can be many different forms. I should say that this here is not a definitive list. It's very hard to break these down into exact areas, and there's a lot of overlap, as we'll see. And then there's some of the more modern drivers behind the extinction of wildlife, such as pollution and climate change, which people weren't really discussing until about maybe 20, 30 years ago. These weren't really on people's agenda. But now suddenly they're actually big news, and the impacts on wildlife has been massive. The illegal wildlife trade, this is another area that I'm going to be talking about in more detail, which is the fourth biggest illegal industry on the planet. And then finally, there's livestock. Again, I could devote an entire presentation to this, but I've only got so much time. Now, a lot of people ask me how I got into this industry. So before launching into some of the jobs and some of the issues that I've just touched upon, I'll give you a brief overview of how I became an environmental photojournalist. And this is one of my favorite quotes. Pen and camera are weapons against oblivion. They can create awareness for that which may soon be lost forever. And this is something that I've tried to take into my work over the past 10 years. So I didn't used to, I actually had a very different life before getting into this industry. I had a very traditional British middle-class upbringing. I went the very traditional route. I went to school, university, and then I got into the business world. I was a copywriter. I worked for ad agencies for a long time. Whilst most kids want to be like firemen or policemen, I wanted to write adverts as a kid. I knew every advert on TV. And then after working as a copywriter, I decided to start a modeling agency with my best friend from school. And we did that when I was in my mid-20s for 5 or 6 years. Had a great time during that period. But then I started to look in the mirror and I didn't like what I saw, and I started to feel empty and a little bit dead inside. So I decided to shake things up, and I'd always loved David Attenborough. And he was an idol in the same way that he is for many British people. So growing up, I was brought up with his documentaries, and I was in my late 20s, and I thought, you know what, if I'm going to do something with my life, if I'm going to follow a dream, I have to do it now. So I sold my part of the business to my business partner, and I went to wildlife filmmaking school in Africa. And that is how all the madness began. So my first job, actually, I ended up buying just a very cheap underwater camera. And this was the first job that I did that looked into human-animal conflict. And it's still, to me, one of the most important jobs that I've ever worked on. And I traveled to Mozambique, and I met a couple of guys who were working on a documentary about shark finning. So I said, look, let me do what I can to help. I just want to volunteer. I want to learn from you guys. And they said, why not come and join the team? So I joined up as a photographer. I didn't know anything about photography in those days. And I went with them on a 2-year journey to learn all about the shark finning issues in Mozambique. Mozambique has a 3,000-kilometer coastline, and it only has one patrol vessel for all of that space. And over the past 20 years, these waters have been absolutely decimated by industrial fishing vessels that operate far out of sight, illegally and unregulated. So our documentary, which was in partnership with WWF, was looking at some of the problems of Mozambique's coastline, and it followed a local guy called Carlos Makwakwa, who was the first Mozambican dive instructor ever. And during that time, we lived with the shark fishermen in Mozambique. We spent time at these rural shark fishing communities, and this was the hut that we used to live in. And you can see the shark jaws there at the front and the shark fins. And we spent time getting to know the shark fishermen. And these guys, they're often demonized in the press. You know, they're wiping out all of the shark populations, but actually they're just doing what they can to make a living. And the fishermen in Mozambique could earn, for a single month, they could catch one shark and earn 1 month's wages for one large shark for the cost of the fins, which was around, they could get about $200 for a large shark if they sold the fins. And this was how they went out fishing every day. These were actually 2 oil drums that they had cut up and they'd used to make oars. And we went out with the guys every day for a couple of weeks living in their community and going out fishing with them. They used to catch about 10 to 15 sharks every single day. But when we went to document their work, they hadn't caught a shark in 6 months. When we asked them why that was the case, they said it was very simple. It was because of all of the illegal fishing that was happening far out of sight. So whilst people somehow might blame artisanal fishermen, it's really not them who are doing the damage to marine ecosystems. It's these large vessels that indiscriminately just bring up whatever they can. This was a snaggletooth weasel shark, and I was the first person to ever film the shark underwater, and unfortunately it was dead on a long line. So this is one of the only records of this very rare shark. No one has ever seen it alive underwater yet. In Mozambique, they've actually managed to catch one. This is still one of my favorite shots that I ever took. And it was one of the first shots that I took when I was like, okay, I can now really see the power of photography. For me, this is such a powerful, visceral shot. It's using a technique called close focus wide angle. It involves using a wide angle lens and then getting very close to your subject. And what that does is that throws the focus of attention onto your subject. It makes it big, large, it's looming into the screen. And at the same time, because you're using a wide angle lens, it means that you can also include all of your background elements. So we also get to see the fisherman who is there admiring his catch. And this was a large bull shark. This was the first shark that they'd caught in 6 months. And you should have seen how happy the local community were because they knew that they would suddenly be able to feed their families because of this one shark. The fins are then taken off and they are then sent to middlemen before they make their way all the way to China. And I think everyone here knows that the shark's fins are used for shark fin soup. You have about 100 million sharks every single year that are being killed because of this industry. And it's wiping out shark populations worldwide. Luckily, things are starting to change now a little bit in Asia, and particularly in China. There is more awareness of it, and there is a movement away from shark fin soup. So this film was shown all over Mozambique. This is us at the premiere. And because of the film, we actually managed to achieve some tangible and some quite satisfactory results. So for example, because of information that was contained in the film about sharks, so we took a sample from that bull shark and we sent it for testing in South Africa. And we found out that that sample had 2,000% of the recommended daily amount of methyl mercury for human consumption. So because of catching the sharks and then eating them, the fishermen were actually poisoning themselves and their families. So we found out that because of information contained in our film, the fishermen stopped eating the shark meat. So it's small victories like this that manage to keep you going in this industry. So I then started to write about it.
And when was this? When was this?
This was 10 years ago now.
10 years.
10 years, yeah. So I then started writing about it, and particularly for FHM. FHM were very interested in these stories, and they started to commission me to go off on missions around Africa, because of course, in Africa, everywhere you turn, there's a story. It's not just sharks that are being killed for their fins, it's tortoises that are being sent for the exotic pet trade, it's seals that are being culled. Africa is just one big story in terms of human-wildlife conflict. This was a piece that I did traveling to Namibia. It was an undercover mission to expose the annual seal cull that they have in Namibia. Everyone knows about Canada and seals being culled there. Yet in Namibia, you have between 50 and 70,000 seals that are being killed every year. So me and my buddy Chris Scarf, we drove this battered yellow Mercedes across the whole of Africa. 6,000 kilometers we did in that car, and we lost various parts of it along route. Wheels, exhaust, windows, everything possible. We got chased through the desert by seal clubbers. And then in the end, our names got released to the press and we had to do a runner get out of Namibia. We drove 17 hours straight back to Cape Town to get out of Namibia. This was a mission I did also driving a, sorry?
When was that?
That was about 7 years ago.
Okay.
This was a mission I did driving across Africa again with a guy that had no legs, trying to raise awareness for little known NGOs. So going and visiting small wildlife NGOs with a guy with no legs on motorbikes across Africa. And this was a piece for National Geographic about the tortoise mafia and how you have tortoise populations in Africa, in Madagascar in particular, that are being wiped out for the exotic pet trade. And now you have this crazy situation where you can get up to $40,000 for a single tortoise in Madagascar called a plowshare tortoise. And it's thought that there's, you know, probably maybe 100 of these animals left in Madagascar. I took this image. This was on the edge of a cliff in the most remote part of southern Madagascar. And it was the site of a meteor strike. And we went there at sunrise, and you just had all of these tortoises wandering around the edge of the cliff as the sun rose. And then this tortoise just was there perched perfectly right on the edge, the sun behind it. And again, it was one of my earlier shots, but still one of my favorites, and one that I often use regularly to this day.
It's one of these photos where people often ask you if you pushed the tortoise there, or isn't it one of those?
Well, we could have another presentation about the manipulation of wildlife and what not to do, but we won't go there for this. After that, I started working for Scuba Zoo TV and presenting series about conservation. If anyone's interested, you can go to www.scubazoo.tv. Did underwater series, Borneo from below, Timor from below, Indonesia from below. We did series in the jungles. And the idea was to try and take these quite serious issues about conservation, but make them fun and digestible so that people can learn about wildlife and the threats that they're facing, but it's done in what is an entertaining and an educational way. I called it Funservation. Everyone else hated it when I called it that, and it was banned, but I am still sticking it to this day.
Here you're with the dragons in Komodo.
Yes.
They're not running at you, because every time we go to that beach, they're quite...
They were running at me, and I had to make a very sharp exit there. You do not want to get bitten by a Komodo dragon, and they were in full hunting mode, so I had to make a very quick exit there.
Hope you got the shot.
Got the shot. Then, when I was working for Scuba Zoo, I took this image, and this image was a winner at Wildlife Photographer of the Year 2 years ago, of elephants in a palm oil plantation. And it was part of a documentary we were making about human-elephant conflict in Borneo. You now only have about 2,000, well, less than that, about 1,500 elephants left there because of the palm oil industry. And elephants do very well in palm oil plantations. And because of this, they end up at the wrong end of the palm oil plantation and the workers. So elephants are being shot, they're being poisoned in plantations, and that has reduced their numbers to less than about 1,500. All right, so the illegal wildlife trade, that's enough about me. Let's talk more about some of these issues. The illegal wildlife trade, as I mentioned earlier, it's the fourth most lucrative illegal industry in the world, behind arms, human trafficking, and drugs. Conservative estimate, it's worth around $20 billion per year. And it takes many forms: medicine, the illegal pet trade, wildlife tourism, which is an area that I've been focusing on a lot for the last couple of years. Could be skins, souvenirs, and many different areas. Because of the illegal wildlife trade, it is decimating wildlife populations around the world. I could, again, go on with statistics for the entire presentation, but I'm not going to. But you have an elephant being killed every 15 minutes. We have lost 40% of lions in the last 25 years alone. And there's more tigers. This statistic always baffles me. More tigers in captivity in America than in the wild. There's only about 3,900 tigers left in the wild. So that gives you an idea of how many of them are kept in America. I don't know probably quite a lot of you have seen Tiger King, about those abhorrent individuals keeping tigers. So wildlife tourism is something that I have been investigating with my camera for the last couple of years, particularly living in Asia, which is the epicenter of the cruel wildlife tourism industry. Every year, it's estimated that 110 million people around the world visit cruel wildlife tourism attractions. Yet most of them don't have any idea that the places that they're actually visiting are cruel. People don't want to see animals coming to any harm, yet they don't know of the abuse that's actually happening, not just in front of their eyes, but also behind closed doors. So when the shows end, when the zoos close, so the way that some of the animals are treated. And it's an industry that is worth around $250 billion a year, so huge money is involved. One of the animals that I've been looking at for the past few years and making a documentary about is orangutans used in wildlife tourism. This is an image that I took in Indonesia at a zoo. It's very powerful, I feel, to try and get eye contact with your subject. So if you want your viewer to feel a connection with the animal that you're taking a picture of, and particularly when it comes to an issue as complex and at times distressing as wildlife tourism, getting that eye contact is a very powerful tool. I actually used Christmas tree lights to get that flaring in the corner. It just gives it something a little bit different. You know, there's so many people taking photos these days that you want to do what you can to develop your own style and to make your images stand out, to give them something different. This was a shot at Pata Zoo in Thailand, the infamous Pata Zoo. And this is an orangutan sprawled on the floor. Orangutans are arboreal. They spend almost their entire lives living up in the treetops. Yet here it is in a concrete cell sprawled on the floor. And the same here, I took this image in Vietnam, and this animal was just cowering behind these boulders, and people would come up to it and they would shout abuse, they would throw things at the glass, they would scream at the orangutan, and all the time it just had either its head up against the window or it was there behind these two boulders. That's all it had for any type of stimulation. We have to remember with orangutans, we're dealing with highly intelligent, complex animals that share about 97% DNA with humans. And they need stimulation. They need to be in their natural habitat. They don't need to be in a 4 meter by 5 meter box being gawked at and shouted at by people. And they also suffer from acute levels of stress and depression in captivity. When you think they might live to 40 years of age, essentially that represents many decades of suffering. This is Bali Zoo, where I am at the moment, and you can have an experience where you actually go and eat breakfast amongst orangutans. And what's so amazing is that people, they go there and they kind of think that actually it's okay. They think that the orangutans are healthy. They think that, that Bali Zoo is somehow contributing to conservation. I can tell you this now, Bali Zoo does fuck all for conservation. They give 0.06% of ticket fees to a so-called conservation scheme. And that's what a lot of zoos hide behind, is that they'll say that they are working for conservation or that they have conservation value. Whereas the majority, I'm not saying all zoos are like that, the majority of zoos do little to nothing for conservation. It's purely exploitation. And then there's places where orangutans are supposed to be wild and free, like Bukit Lawang.
Can we just, Aaron, sorry, could we just go back to, I just got some questions on, you said that in Vietnam that they were shouting abuse at the orangutans.
Yeah.
Why do you, I mean, obviously your Vietnamese is probably not that good, but why do you reckon they were, was it just making fun?
It was something that I saw in Vietnam a lot. I don't want to point fingers, but people would just taunt the animals. Actually, no, that's not true. I've seen it. I've been to so many zoos around the world now. For the last 3 years, I've been to zoos in 15, 20 countries. And a lot of the time, people just like taunting animals. They'll throw food at them, or they'll taunt them with food, come and have this, but then they can't get to it. So people just seem to get a kick out of it. That simple.
And another question is about your photography. Is it like very obvious? Are you like, making yourself visible as a professional photographer, or how do you actually get so close?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question, and it's one I get asked a lot. Most of the time, I'm just there as a tourist, and everyone's got a camera. So you don't actually stand out. The only reason that I ever stand out is because I have a face like thunder and I scream at people to stop being twats and stop, taunting the animals. But other than that, you just try and blend in as much as possible. It's only, if you're trying to get like secret shots or you're trying to get behind the scenes access that sometimes you can end up drawing attention to yourself. Okay, so this is Bukit Lawang, where supposedly the orangutans are wild and free, whereas actually what we have is an artificial situation where the orangutans have become so habituated that the guides are now feeding them, and the orangutans are chasing the guides and they're chasing the tourists, and it's created this quite dangerous situation. So it's not just zoos as well, it's these even supposed ecotourism destinations. Then there is the infamous safari world.
Hang on, before we go to that, just because you showed here a natural place, there's, I'm not aware of this name, Punkalabun in January. Have you heard of that?
Never heard of that.
Safina asked this question. I'm not sure where this is, but we can figure out if that's legit. Okay, keep going.
I would like to have a look at that. I'll have a look afterwards. So this is the infamous safari world in Thailand, where the orangutans are forced into boxing shows. And Safari World was actually closed down in 2004 when they did DNA tests on the orangutans, and they found out that rather than being bred in Thailand, as Safari World claimed, that they were in fact illegally imported from either Malaysia or Indonesia. So the authorities confiscated all of the orangutans, over 100 orangutans, but then within a few years they managed to get hold of more. And I don't want to spoil it too much because we've been working so hard on this documentary, but the way that these animals are captured from the wild by traders it's stuff that will make your blood boil. It's stuff that made me want to throw up when I heard how these animals were actually being caught and then sent off to be exploited in this way. And you have them being caught in the wild, you have the mothers being killed, and then the babies are caught and they are sent off to perform in attractions like this. And they will be trained using these horrific methods such as beatings and electrocutions, and then they are made to perform in these shows, and they are dressed up in bikinis. And look at this orangutan, emaciated, broken spirit. And then they have to perform like this 2 days a week in front of humans. These are solitary, shy animals, so to be in these conditions would be so stressful for them. And this was my photo that was just in, also in wildlife photography. Photography competitions was something that I never used to enter them. It always felt like a bit of an ego boost. Which I guess it is in some ways. But actually what these competitions do is they give you a massive platform. So because of Wildlife Photographer of the Year, because it's shown in 70 countries around the world and it's in every news outlet going, what it does is it increases awareness of your issues. And sometimes you need these platforms to get your message out to a wider audience. So now I know that because of competitions like this, a lot of people will know about issues like the elephants in the palm or like the boxing orangutans that otherwise they wouldn't have known anything about. This is something a bit different. This was a story I did recently about goats in Morocco, and everyone goes to Morocco and they see the goats that are standing up in trees, and they go to have photos taken with these goats because they believe that it's a naturally occurring phenomenon. Whereas actually on closer inspection, you can see that there are little platforms built for the goats. And the farmers will actually go up and they will place the goats in the trees every single day. And these goats are emaciated, they're full of parasites, and they are forced to stand in trees for days on end with no food, no water. And yet we go there and we look and we think, oh, isn't it cute? Isn't it adorable how these goats just stand in trees? So I broke that story to the media, I think last year or the year before, and that got a lot of attention. So it's just about planting the seed when people are going and they're visiting some of these wildlife tourism attractions, to not just blindly go somewhere and just take selfies, to actually sometimes question it and to look at how the animals are being treated, and to rather than saying, oh, I want that Instagram photo, to think about the animal welfare. This was Taman Safari in Indonesia.
Sorry if I just interrupted, like the similar question came up earlier with orangutans, like how does one know if it's a good or bad rehab center or shelter? Or
it's
very difficult to find out. Right?
Very, very difficult. It involves doing a lot of research. Speaking to people that you know and trust, I find, is always the best way. So if there's people in the industry, because TripAdvisor is absolute bullshit. It's rubbish. Never look at TripAdvisor, because if you go there, you'll see all 5-star reviews. The animals look so happy, blah, blah, blah. Speak to people in the know, do your research, and actually, Google is a great source of information and research. So if you do enough digging, you'll find out more information about the place that you want to visit.
And I would maybe add, from my personal feeling, is that in doubt, don't do it, because you are supplying money to people who might or might not benefit from it, unless you're sure that they're not benefiting from it. Like I was just in Sri Lanka this year, and in every town there, they have these turtle hatcheries, but in there you'll find turtles that might be a year old. The hatcheries is just something to protect them from egg stage, just a couple of days or maybe a week or two, just until they're a little bit bigger, and then they're supposed to be released. But that's not the case. They're just being kept there as mascots. And then I remember chatting with somebody, and they were saying, well, this one didn't have any bad reviews, but the concept has a bad review. So, you still need to not be part of that exploitation, I think.
And this is a prime example here, Taman Safari. Taman Safari is the biggest, glitziest, glamorous safari park in all of Indonesia. And here you can ride elephants through traffic. Elephants have got the most sensitive hearing of any animal in the animal kingdom. And can you imagine for them having to go through these hordes of traffic? And then we saw the elephants started to misbehave a little bit. And we noticed that the handlers were punching them on their trunks. And we were like, what's going on here? So I managed to get a photo of it when the guy mid-punch. And when we looked, we could see that they actually had nails in their hands. They were disguising nails. And they used these to control the elephants. And they were punching holes in their trunks. There's 100,000 muscles in an elephant's trunk. They're very sensitive. So this is the way that they try and assert their dominance over them. And it's a common tactic used in other places. Of course, this went, again, all over the media, and they denied it. It's like, you've got the image here, you've got the proof, yet you're still going to deny that you're doing that.
So we got a question here, like, how do you actually control your feelings in a situation like that? Because obviously, like you said earlier, if you would get angry, then you wouldn't have access to the
How do I? I'm not very good at controlling my feelings. Speak to my girlfriend and she'll probably back that up. It's very hard to. You really need to be as inconspicuous as possible, and to just try and keep a poker face at all times, because if you don't, you will draw attention to yourself, and then you could blow your entire mission. And bear in mind that you could have traveled halfway across the world to document something. So you even really, then the more I've done it, the more experienced I get at it, I just try and become part of it. So if, for example, I was covering the story of the macaques in Morocco, unfortunately you have to then pose for photos with them, and it makes you feel sick to your stomach doing it, and then of course you have to pay the people to do it, but it's part of your persona, and sometimes you even have to befriend the people that you're trying to screw over. which leaves you with lots of mixed feelings. But most of the time I don't care because these people are doing horrific things. So it doesn't bother me exposing them. It does bother me. It worries me about the danger element and the danger to my family. Sometimes I've done some very full-on missions that I can't even talk about, but there is a very real danger. There's so much money involved, particularly in wildlife tourism.
So, I mean, you have to pay to get in there if you want to do it inconspicuously, right? I mean, does that, there's a question here that somebody asked, how does it make you feel when you actually pay to...
Terrible.
To see
Terrible, yeah. You don't want to be paying this. You don't want to pay a macaque handler to take a photo of his macaque. Of course you don't. But I know that small amount of money, that sacrifice I'm making and that moral dilemma I have is worth it because the images that I take can be instrumental in bringing awareness, or even in best case scenarios, bringing an end to some of these issues.
So you will just sometimes spend money to see multiple of these horrible things, just so you can have a chance to document it.
I've spent thousands and thousands of pounds, often out of my own pocket, traveling around the world to document these issues. But we've had some proper results. You know, zoos have been shut down because of these exposés. Governments have taken action. There's been petitions. There's been more awareness. So that's how I justify it. I've had comments on social media, people going, "You're sick. How can you just stand there and take photos of what's happening?" And yeah, I get a lot of negative comments on social media, to which I normally respond, "Go fuck yourself," because there's a lot of ignorance around, and social media gives a voice to every goddamn fool out there. And if they don't understand what I'm trying to do, then I don't care about their opinion.
Yeah, no, I think that the important thing is that you're getting them back later and bigger if you get this close-up shot of the nail puncture of the elephant trunk.
Exactly.
That's just going to go so much further for these elephants that I mean, I think it's no question really that you must disguise yourself so that you can take those photos.
Exactly. So this was a story I did about cruel wild, because these problems aren't specific to Asia. They're also all over Europe. In Europe, you can go and you can still ride elephants. You can still go to a circus where there's elephants. You can go in France where they still use wolves and bears in these medieval performances. And you can go in Spain and you can have your photos taken with a tiger. I actually posed as a National Geographic journalist. Oh God, I shouldn't have said that. I should have named it. But I posed as a journalist to get in there, to get access to this place, and then managed to get shots of this tiger where you can go and pay a lot of money to go have your photos taken with the tiger. And then there are circuses. This is a circus in the Czech Republic where they still use, this guy would run around basically thrashing the lions and getting them to perform. And then after the show, the lions are kept in trailers like this. So this is their life. They perform very quickly, and then this is how they spend the rest of their time. I had the circus contact me after this story was released in The Independent, and they were very, very angry about this. And they were saying they treat their animals so well. Does this look like they're treating their animals well? I don't think so. So another area is...
just before we go there, have you ever been recognized? Like when you go on...
Yes, in Bali recently I was recognized. I was doing a piece about the turtle rehabilitation centers, and they were like, you're that guy, you're that photographer. And I'm not very good at lying, you know, my lip twitches, and like I get sweaty, and I'm not good at all of this. And then I just tried to kind of laugh it off, but they were too polite to stop me. And that story about the conservation centres was huge. It, you know, got seen all over the world. So again, it doesn't bother me if you know that I feel like they're doing wrong.
I got another one for you.
Oh, war. Okay.
No, we have lots of questions. I just don't want to have.
We have lots of questions. That's okay. Are we all right for time? I'm just timing myself, and I realise that.
I don't think anybody's in a rush here. We've got 20 more minutes anyway, but you know we overshoot it a little bit. I think it's a really very good topic, and you know I'd like to put in the questions where they fit.
Sure.
Somebody asked a really difficult question. I want to see how you handle that one. He's saying, are you a photojournalist or are you an activist? Your words are very strong, not particularly neutral. He's not criticizing you, but he's saying it's a question to be asked, which I think is a fair question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm definitely a photojournalist. I have become more aware and more passionate about animal rights and activism since doing this job. But for example, I'm not even a vegetarian. You know, I still eat meat, so I can't claim that I'm an animal rights activist. Most of the time, I feel like I can, you know, let off some steam on forums like this. But most of the time, I try and stay just kind of behind the camera. That's where I'm happiest these days. And just let the images do the talking, and you let other people, you let the animal rights activists, they're the ones who are on the front line and putting their bodies in harm's way. Generally, I just want to document and to show people what's happening through my imagery.
Good answer. Well done.
Okay, so another area that I've been covering is the exotic pet trade. And this is a massive industry. Millions of animals are used in the exotic pet trade every single year. They're stolen from the wild, and then they are kept in people's homes. But the problem is that most of the time, people, they don't know how to look after these animals, or they get bored very quickly. And then 3/4 of the animals within a year are dead. Or people will get bored and they will just release them into the wild. Also, there's the problems with the breeding. Breeding could be very cruel, and it can cause serious defects, such as in the ball python industry. And then people don't feed the animals the right sorts of diets. They hold them too much. There's the chance of disease transmission from humans to animals and vice versa. So a lot of the animals will be very susceptible to the bacteria that we have on our hands, for example. And then there's the case of welfare and how they're kept. And most of the time they're kept in cages, they're kept in habitats that are completely unsuitable for them, just so that we can have something that is cool or is exotic or that we can show off to our friends. Most of the animals used in the exotic pet trade, they're not domesticated. So dogs, cats, we've been keeping dogs and cats for thousands of years now, and they enjoy human company. Whereas a python, or most reptile species or birds, they don't want to be with people. They want to be out in the wild. So we've been working with World Animal Protection, my colleague Will and I, Will, who's a fantastic director I've been working with for many years. And one story we did was about otters and the exotic pet trade. And otters, because of social media, because of all these images of otters and how cute they are, and they make such great pets, they're now a craze, they're a pet craze across Asia. And otters are being stolen from the wild, and often the parents will be killed so they can get to the babies, and then the babies are illegally exported around the world, and they can fetch up to $10,000 each. And this is what a very famous otter that we went to film in Tokyo. And this otter has like 400,000 Instagram followers or something crazy because people think it's so cute.
Did you set this photo up? I love this photo. I mean, like the human coming across like Chucky.
Yeah, it's like The Ring. It's like a horror movie. No, absolutely not. I was actually conducting an interview with the owner, and I saw the otter just walking across the windowsill. I didn't even know the child was there, I'll be honest. And it was just quick. I didn't even have time to check my exposure or anything. And I just ended up with this very, very lucky shot. Photography is sometimes about that. Simon, you know that more than anyone, being underwater. Photography is about luck a lot of the time. And particularly photojournalism, sometimes you just get these moments where everything comes together. You get the right lights, you get an interesting subject, you get the right setting, and then you come away with an image like this that goes on to be seen very widely or to win awards. This was an otter group in Indonesia where they go out and they take their pet otters to play. And this is otter cafes in Japan, where you can go now and you can go and play with otters. Yeah, otters they're really very difficult to domesticate. They're noisy, they're smelly, they're expensive to keep. I promise you, otters make the worst pets humanly imaginable. Like and every otter owner that we interviewed was like broken by the experience. And you just have these crazed animals like running around like little Tasmanian devils. And they'll pick things up, they'll chew, they'll eat, they'll bite, they chase each other. They smell so badly because of this gland they have that produces this hideous aroma. So trust me, do not ever decide to keep an otter as a pet. This was in one of the otter cafes, and this is what's called stereotypical behavior. And you see this a lot in animals in captivity. It could be pacing, it could be bobbing, it could be biting. It's a repetitive behavior that is a signal of stress. So this otter had bitten off part of its tail because of the stress of being kept in this noisy and bright environment. Let's move. I'm going to skip past that Python story. So another area that I've been looking at over the past few years is the overexploitation of wildlife globally. And here's some of the facts. So we are currently taking wild species out quicker than they can recover, which is known as how sustainable it is. So currently, the way that we're taking wild animals is completely unsustainable, and that's terrestrial and that's underwater as well. Underwater, the total biomass of targeted marine species has reduced by 90% since the 1960s. And this can take, the overexploitation can take many different forms, such as bushmeat, wet markets, which of course is so pertinent at the moment, overfishing, poaching, and traditional medicine. Now this is a wet market that I visited in Jakarta, and this is Jatinegara. And bizarrely, this wet market is still running, despite what has happened with coronavirus. You can still go to Jatinegara and go and buy a bat, for example. Bats harbour 145 different diseases. They are a reservoir for infectious diseases. And that is why, as far as we know, and unless you're a conspiracy theorist, the source of coronavirus was probably a pangolin out in the forest, ate a bat dropping, contracted a virus from a bat. Pangolin gets taken to a market, Wuhan gets chopped up or eaten, someone gets blood in a cut or in their eye or consumes this toxic meat. And the next thing you know, here we are, everyone's in lockdown, and I'm giving a presentation like this via Zoom. And these markets, I mean, it's amazing that you don't get more of these pandemics, because you can go and look at this. In this one picture, you can see multicolored chicks, bats, macaques, civets, and a python in the bottom right. You can see multiple different species all kept together in baking heat, not being fed or watered properly, and then being taken away either for the pet trade or to be consumed. I mean, it's remarkable that this pandemic didn't happen earlier. Civets, they're kept frequently either as pets or they're used to create kopi luwak, which is civet coffee. These animals are often force-fed coffee beans in order for them to produce a coffee that really doesn't taste much better than normal coffee. Worse. And this is a story that I just did in West Africa. So in West Africa, as part of a documentary I was making about pythons and the exotic pet trade, I visited this market. And this market was like something out of Mad Max. It was apocalyptic. There was fires everywhere. There were people rolling around the floor, tearing each other's hair out. There was just filth of an unimaginable scale. And when you go through this market, and sorry, I didn't say it's in Benin, at the top of it, you come to a rooftop, and there is a voodoo market at the top of a rooftop. Very few people know about this. It's certainly not a touristy like the one in Togo is. And then you go, and this guy is a voodoo trader, and he's been doing this for all of his entire life. And this is what he knows, and then he sells these animal parts, and people will use them for medicinal purposes, or they will use, to cure a variety of ailments, or to make them strong when they have a court date. There's many different purposes for all of these animals here. I like this image as well because I feel like it humanizes it. This guy he's not necessarily a monster. Well, no, I don't say not necessarily. He's not a monster. He's just someone who is doing what his father taught him, what he has always known, and he is making a living. And if you live in Benin and you struggle to make ends meet, you will do what you can in order to survive. So I think it's important, and I try and do this a lot with my photography, is to try and humanize my subjects as much as possible, and not to demonize them, because these subjects, they're not always black and white, because there's many kind of shades of gray between. And then pangolins, of course. And here we are. This is also at that voodoo market. Now, very briefly, if you look at the species there, you have vultures, geckos, civets, birds, snakes, tortoises, dogs. If I were to sum up human-animal conflict in a single image, this would be it. One shot of what humans are doing to the planet. And there's even, if you look in the middle of the photo, there's even we think it might be a dog head that has been painted to look like a leopard. It's the same one that's used in this picture here. This is another story that I did recently about dog eating in Cambodia.
Hey everybody, this is the toughest one to stomach, just telling you.
Sorry. The whole thing's not easy to stomach. I did promise you that. Why do you think I'm drinking this gin so quickly? So, dog eating in Cambodia. 3 million dogs a year are killed in Cambodia, and they're rounded up from the streets, beaten over the head. Often people's pets are caught, stuffed in cages like this, transported across Cambodia in the back of a car where many of them die en route. And then they are killed in drowning pits. This was a drowning pit in Cambodia. And again, it looks like the scene from a horror movie. In this putrid tank of water, every single day, hundreds of dogs would be brought here in cages. And there was a macaque chained up there. And this macaque would have to watch the drowning of these dogs. Every single day would have seen tens of thousands of dogs being killed like this in this putrid water. Like, again, something you can't make these places up. Then the dogs' carcasses are sent off to restaurants around Cambodia where they have the skin removed, and then they're served up and people consume them because they believe dog meat has medicinal properties. And the penises are removed and people make bracelets out of them. So this is a dog penis bracelet. This image I like a lot because it's, I think it shows a kind of a piece. It looks like, I call it dog angel. So despite all the horrors and the brutality of the industry and the way that this dog died, here it looks like it's at peace. So I would always recommend everyone, if you're interested in photography, always think of different ways to approach your scenes, a different perspective and angles. I like this top-down view. And think very carefully about your composition. You're trying to create something that is aesthetically pleasing, as well as an image that has impact.
I mean, if I can just maybe add my commentary, because I remember when you went through these photos, you sent me a couple and you was like, hey, have a look at a couple of these and they're so tough to stomach. But this one really captures your whole story, even for somebody who doesn't know what's going on. It is clear it's a dog. It is clear it's some sort of consumption situation. It is horrible, but it's a aesthetically still sort of clean picture in a way. Like if you compare it with the otter and Chucky that you showed earlier, there you have to say a lot of things before you understand what that is. But here, I think it's super clear. I don't know. Yeah. I think this picture is very strong.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it is too, and that's a good point as well. What you're often trying to do is you're trying to if you could tell a story in one image, in a single image, like if we go back to that elephants and palm oil plantation, that says it all. that says human-elephant conflict. It says deforestation. It says elephant suffering. Here, like you just explained very well, is this tells an entire story in a single, visually impactful way that I hope will stay with people. I want people to feel something when they see my images. I couldn't care less about going and taking wildlife photos, or going on safari and photographing a lion having a yawn in a bush. Like, it doesn't interest me. I want people to be like punched in the guts when they see my imagery, and to learn and to be able to educate themselves about these issues.
I mean, I remember when you came back from this trip, you were really, this was like, I was a heavy one. But somebody asked earlier, do you get like treatment for traumatization or something? Do you, what do you do to keep your, yourself?
Again, revert back to this.
That's not a good answer.
You know what? Honestly, I've pushed myself, and you think that you're superhuman, and you think that you can handle it all. And then actually I reached breaking point and crisis point, and it culminated with this bout of pneumonia. And I've had a lot of difficult moments over the past couple of months, asking myself if I can do this anymore, because I don't know if I can handle it. I don't know if I can handle the emotional distress. I don't know if I can deal with the physical side, the constant moving, and I mean, these shoots, I cannot say how difficult they are. And often I'm doing jobs that are back to back to back. And last year I did 6 months on the road. I did 6 months, 16 countries, 4 different projects, back to back, almost without a break. And at some point your body is going to tell you, and your mind is going to tell you, that you've had enough. So yes, it's important. You have to try and look after yourself. And I'm going to have to make some changes moving forward if I'm to continue in this industry, which I want to do, to look after myself as well. Bit of self-love, and just to not push it too much, because if I break myself, then I'm not going to be able to do it anymore, and then you'll just burn out. And
you can't tell all stories anyway, so you just do as many as you can, and
do as many as you can. Having breaks in between them as well is important, and also to remind yourself that there's good in the world. There's people who are doing amazing things for wildlife and amazing things for conservation and for animals. And I've chosen a path where it focuses primarily on the negatives, because I find it so stimulating and interesting. But you have to remind yourself that there is hope out there, and that can be challenging when you're photographing dead dogs in a bucket of blood.
And you know what? I think you have to take your breaks and make sure that you don't get completely desensitized for it. Because I remember somebody told me, actually, a woman I went to school with, she was in Rwanda after the genocide, but that was a really tough time, obviously. And she said after 2 years, she just couldn't, you push it, to stay sane, you push it away from yourself, and then at some point you become this person who doesn't respond emotionally to these things anymore. Also not good, right? So
exactly. You want to retain some level of feeling and some level of empathy, and you can get compassion fatigue. That's a real worry, is that these things don't affect you anymore, or they affect you too much. My view has been to bury it deep into my toes and to let a therapist try and dig it out in a few years, but it hasn't worked very well. Here I am on the verge of a nervous breakdown. So did that answer the question?
yes, you did.
Okay, all right. Then the final job I want to talk about is one that I did for Discovery Channel a couple of years ago, and it was for Shark Week, and it was the first ever show that they were doing on conservation, and it was about bycatch. Around 40% of the world's total catch is bycatch. And bycatch, for those of you who don't know, are animals that are accidentally caught and then thrown away afterwards. So the prawn trawling industry is the biggest problem for bycatch, and you will get about 90%. So there's 90% bycatch for every 10% of targeted species. So if you go to the supermarket tomorrow, and you order a kilo of prawns, just think that for that kilo of prawns, 9 kilos of other animals, like you will see here, have been killed or discarded overboard. And again, this is an image that tells an entire story in one photo. Now, as part of that story, we went out onto the high seas in South Africa, and we witnessed sharks being caught completely legally on long lines there. And there were long lines stretching for 5 kilometers. And on every long line, at intervals of maybe 20 meters, they have these hooks dangling down. On every line, there are 3 hooks. So you can imagine how long this extends. On almost every single hook, we saw a dead shark. And this was just going out randomly one day on the South African high seas. We didn't expect to see these guys. There were thousands of dead sharks on these long lines. There's no wonder that shark species are going extinct. Our fishing methods are simply too good these days. And this was a moment when somehow people can kind of glamorize this work or this industry, and they think that you're traveling the world and you're having a great time and you're working with all these exotic animals and it's great fun and it's very glamorized. Whereas actually this was probably the hardest shoot I've ever done. For an underwater photographer, I get very seasick. So we were out with the crew from Discovery Channel, and I have been on this boat whilst we're photographing these, and I have been vomiting for 4 hours non-stop. I'm literally lying on the floor shaking. I'm green. I'm vomiting on the floor, on the bottom of the boat. And yet, because I'm presenting the show, you have to be on camera and you have to maintain some enthusiasm and you have to keep your cool as much as possible. So they're like, come on, this is a one-off. You have to get up. So you get up, you do a piece to camera. I'd throw up, I'd shiver. And then they were like, okay, you've got to get in the water now because we're being circled by these sharks all around the boat. So I jump in the water, I'm like, maybe that will sort me out. And then I'm just, I'm vomiting on my camera. At that point in time, I didn't care whether I lived or died. I didn't care whether I dropped the camera, whether I lost, a 5,000 pound camera and housing, or whether the shark swallowed me up. I just wanted it to be over. It was one of the most horrific things. And then you're being buzzed by mako sharks and blue sharks, because I'm in a cloud of vomit, it's attracting all the sharks. So I'm like, with one hand, I'm fending off a mako shark with my camera. With another, I've got blue shark. And these guys are pretty feisty things. So that's just something to kind of, I just wanted to finish off the presentation with that little story. For those of you who think that this is a glamorous industry, it most certainly is not always. Finally, why protect animals? We need wildlife. Ecosystem services are worth $125 trillion a year. That's the same as the world's total GDP. Also now we know that animals suffer in the same way that we suffer and we feel pain, animals do too. And for example, it used to be thought that fish didn't feel pain, whereas we now have done scientific studies and we know that they of course do as well as we do. So therefore we really don't have any excuse to be causing unnecessary suffering and pain to animals. And also I think we have a moral obligation to protect animals. As it stands, we are contemplating a world without manta rays, without tigers, without elephants, without great white sharks. And this is the legacy that we are going to leave our grandchildren. And we are going to be the ones who has to sit there and say, sorry about that, but on our watch, these animals all went extinct because of our short-sightedness and because of our greed. So I want to thank everyone again for coming and asking some good questions. Of course, feel free to ask many more questions. I'm not going anywhere. Here's some links. I'm just going to leave these on screen. If you want to know any more about my work, I tend to keep my website very updated. So all articles, images, films are up there. as well as Instagram. If you're interested, I have a Just Giving account whereby people donate, and it helps me to continue covering these stories around the world. A lot of it, like I said, is self-funded. So people's donations have actually helped me to cover some of these stories. Raise the Red Flag was a platform I worked on with Born Free Foundation, whereby people can actually go and they can make reports and they can flag up cruel wildlife tourism operators. So if you see any abuse happening in the wildlife tourism industry, you can go and you can make a report on Raise the Red Flag.
Okay, so we got a lot of questions, by the way, also lots of compliments and people saying what amazing job you're doing and how hard it is. And some people didn't look at the photos, just looked at your pretty face because they couldn't take it anymore. So lots of those comments. I'm just trying to summarize a couple of clusters of questions that we got. By the way, if you guys need to leave because we've just reached over an hour, we will make the recording available on YouTube. Currently working 2 jobs, so it might take a couple days, but I will upload it and I will email everybody with these links, a couple of extra links that I took note of projects that Aaron's worked on. So I will send an email to everybody with the recording and the links from Aaron. So don't worry if you have to step out. But if you still have time, we'll just do a couple of group questions. Oh, somebody's saying that your Just Giving site is not working. So we'll send the updated link. I will send that in the email to everybody. So maybe just a couple of questions. So one question that came back quite a lot is, are you vegan or vegetarian? I mean,
no, I'm not. No, I'm not. As I touched upon that briefly. Like I've said, I don't consider myself to be an activist. I'm a photographer. I have an interest in animal welfare and animal sentience, and I have become very passionate about the stories that I've worked on. I'm actually going to go on commission for We Animals, who are a client and a good friend, Joanne MacArthur, and I'm going to be covering some livestock stories. Jo is a passionate vegan, and I know that she wants to turn me vegan, so I think that's why she's sending me on assignment. And I think it's a lot of the time, it's only when you go and you witness these things firsthand that it really, it has to be personal. And because I have never gone and I've never seen I'm not gonna, I hold my hands up. I should be vegan because I know the conditions that these animals are kept in and the treatment is horrific. But in fairness, a lot of the time when I'm on assignment, you can't be fussy. You know, you're staying in the arse end of Benin in a local community, or you're staying with the shark fishermen in Mozambique, and you're like, I'm vegan, where's my cashew milk? Like, it's not going to go down well. You have to adapt, and also you have to be able to keep your strength up. So sometimes you can't be too fussy about what you're eating. What I do make is very conscious decisions and conscious choices. So I eat red meat very rarely, once a month. Certain types of fish I won't touch. So I eat a lot less meat because it's much better that 90% of the planet eats less meat rather than 10% of the planet goes vegan. So that's the way I justify it. But no, I should be. That's a bad excuse. I should be.
Yeah, I'm currently been doing 4 months now of being vegetarian because it's just, the more you think about it, the more you just have to be, kind of, isn't it? I mean, there's
exactly.
But it is hard because we've been brought up to eat this, and it tastes so good, and it's not easy.
It is, yeah.
Another big cluster of questions was about how to make this work. So, like, who are your clients? Like, what makes what pays your day? Like, how do you actually survive doing this? So who pays you, and what are your tips for people if they want to start doing something in that direction?
Most of my clients are NGOs. So I work a lot with World Animal Protection, Born Free Foundation, Four Paws, BOS Foundation. So they will send me often on assignments. So if they have stories that they want photos, or they want media coverage for, or they want films. So what like I mentioned, work very closely with Will Foster-Grundy, who's a brilliant director, and we will create entire media packages around a campaign. So for World Animal Protection and the otters, for example, we made a short form film, we made a broadcast documentary, we made a YouTube video, we did all the media coverage, it was all over the global press, and they get photography as well. So they get all these images for future use. So it's about providing a package for NGOs that gets as much exposure as possible for their subjects. Along with that, broadcasters is another big route. So currently pitching some series. So we've got this orangutan documentary that's in the final stages of the edit. So that has been funded by NGOs and private donors. In this industry, you have to beg, borrow, and steal. Wherever the money can come from, you have to follow it, because you are never going to make much money doing this. Let's be fair. Unless you were a National Geographic photographer and you were working on assignment 10 years ago, then you'll make a good living. But that's why people doing what I do, they look at alternative means of income. So for example, you know, Simon, with you, I run photographic tours. Writing articles for magazines, it pays very badly, but that's another way. Selling stock footage, that's one route.
So how would you say somebody could get started? I mean, you obviously, you know, you've been doing it for 15, almost 20 years now. So what would be your tips to beginning photographers that want to be doing something in that sort of photojournalist direction? What would you
go and study law instead? Simple. Go and be a doctor. What would I say? Prepare yourself for to work as hard as you ever worked for no money for a long time. So it really helps if you have alternative forms of income. If you just want to be a photojournalist and you're just starting off, in my industry, you won't be able to survive. You have to have another way of making money as well. So whether, you know, I used to have a flat that I would rent out. So when I was starting off in the industry, I was making money from a flat I had in London, and that helped to support me whilst I built up my body of work and my reputation. But what I would suggest is you have to just go out there and shoot. Like, the best way of learning is by doing. So go out there, find an issue. No matter where you are in the world, there will be interesting stories. Whether you could be in England in an urban area, and there's, you know, fascinating stories about urban foxes. That's just one example. The point is, like, choose a subject that really interests you, go out and shoot, learn from other people, learn from people who you respect, watch YouTube tutorials, send your photos off for feedback, for constructive criticism. I'm happy if anyone wants to send me their pictures, then send them over to me. I'm happy to give feedback. I mean, you know, we've all been, you have to start somewhere, and we've all been there. So I quite enjoy helping to give people a bit of a leg up. And then just, yeah, you know, submit to magazines, submit to competitions, work for free, work with NGOs, volunteer your services with other photographers. Those are the main things that I would recommend to anyone who's starting off in the industry.
Is there, in your opinion, are there any zoos in the world that are acceptable, or would you say all crap?
99.9% of zoos are, I think, detrimental to animals. There are some examples of zoos where they do conservation programs, but 75% of all animals kept in zoos aren't threatened with extinction anywhere. So that's one of the big things that zoos often hide behind, is that they're all about conservation. It's rubbish. They're about making money and exploiting animals. But, you know, saying that there are some zoos where the animals are given enough space, they're well looked after, they're respected, there's breeding programs. So I don't want to tarnish every zoo with the same brush, but the majority of them are doing a very bad job.
I have a very good example. Here in China, we have the panda diplomacy, right? So uh, the China, they have got these breeding programs, and they send out pandas around the world as a sign of,
Mhm.
diplomacy. But essentially, these pandas, they're very, very difficult for them to, um, you know,
Mhm.
get pregnant. They have to be just in the right mindset. And Hong Kong, where I live, received pandas many, many years ago for part of the one of the parks here, and they never have been able to get pregnant. And right now, when the park was closed for the first time in 20 years because of Corona, actually the female got pregnant. So that shows. I mean, they have very big areas. Where the pandas live, and they actually have retreat areas, etc. So in Ocean Park, you seem like they've got pretty good enclosures, but there's constantly people watching them, and it seems that this time now, where there was no people watching, now they were able to have a relaxing environment to actually mate successfully
Mhm.
for the first time in I think it's 20 years that they've had these pandas. So it
Wow.
just shows that humans are not, yeah. Um, Maybe I'm going to lead to another question that is, where would you recommend to see free and happy animals? What's your recommendation?
Um, uh, there's a lot of safari operators. So in Africa, you can go out and you can have very responsible safaris where people really do adhere to the rules and they keep a safe distance and they're not impacting on animals. We have to, like, I'm not against wildlife tourism. Like, animals, absolutely, they need us because without tourism, many of these animals would be going extinct. But what we are finding more and more, and the way that things are going, is that we are just getting to a point where we are ending up with these manufactured areas of wilderness. So even now, or in 10 to 20 years, you're going to go to Oslo to see whale sharks. You're going to go to this specific place to see manta rays. And there will be just these areas that are little sort of, biodiversity hotspots, and there'll be nothing else in between because these animals are very protected because of tourism. So I just want to stress that, there is a very important role for tourism to play, and without it, we would be losing many of these animals. Um, where can people see animals responsibly? It's very different. There are many, many different places. There's also many good conservation centres. Let's give the example of elephants. There's Elephant Nature Park, run by Lek in Chiang Mai in Thailand. So there are many good examples of places where you can either go and see animals in the wild, or you can go to conservation centres that are doing good work and that are helping animal populations. How to find them is, like we were discussing earlier, that's the real challenge, and that's where I would just implore everyone to do their research before visiting anyway.
Yeah, I think very important is that the animal has the option to leave. So if you go to the Serengeti or somewhere in Africa, these animals are not kept in these areas.
Mm-hmm.
They're free to roam, and if they cross borders to Tanzania or to Kenya, that's where I just went last Christmas. They're gonna go, and there's no
Yeah.
way to stop them. And that is one part that's, for example, very good about our business of scuba diving is these animals can't be kept. If they want to swim off, they will. And so if we behave
Yeah.
correctly, they will stay. And if we don't, they will leave. So wherever the animal is not caged in any form, even if it's a huge terrain of like an animal park, if there's no borders and the animal can choose to stay or leave, I think then it's much more justified than an enclosed experience.
And if you can ride it, you can touch it, or you
Yeah.
can take a selfie with it, then
No.
it's a cruel operation, and you shouldn't do it.
So we've had lots of other questions, but I'm going to just ask the last question because some people asked this as well. With all this negative stuff that you see, do you still have hope for our planet?
It depends what day you ask me.
And
Do
if
I
you
still
had
have
the
hope?
blueberry gin,
Yes. You have to maintain hope, because if there was no hope, then why bother? Then we'd all just throw in the towel, and then none of us would try anymore because there's no hope. So you have to be positive, and you have to remain upbeat. And like I touched upon earlier, there's people who are dedicating their lives to trying to helping animals. And there are success stories. There's many success stories of animals that are being brought back from the brink of extinction. So yes, whilst I know we've mainly focused on the negative within this presentation, there are positive stories out there, and there is hope for the future. If there wasn't, then trust me, I would be, jacking this all in now, and I'd be going and making pots on a hill in a cottage somewhere. But yes, there is hope.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Just stay online for a moment. I'm just going to point out that we've got lots of webinars coming up, lots of photographers, wildlife photographers as well. At the moment, we've kind of got them once a week, the photographers. So very different photography, captivating emotions and humans a lot is going to be next week. Alfred Minar, who also lives in the Gillies, coast of Bali. He's going to be talking about that. And then really, really exciting for everybody who loves nature is Richard Barnton, who is a part of the unique diving expeditions team in Palau. And he has documented over 24 different spawns that you can see in Palau, and he will share how to capture these amazing events. I've done the 3 that are here. I've done those, but he has a lot more. So really, really amazing. So can strongly recommend to join that a similar time. Also, I have a ongoing photography series, one about photography in itself. The next one I think is macro, and another one that is about editing. So next part is part 2, Photoshop. So just check Insider Academy for the webinar list. Also, if you want to support our work, we do have to pay for all these, for the webinar software and the materials, etc. So if you want to support our work with a little tip, you can do that on this Fund Me page. But most importantly, just check out our Insider Academy link where you can see all the talks and also all the recordings. So if you like this talk of Aaron, just share this. I think it's a really important message that Aaron is bringing to the table here. So if you share this webinar with friends and family, I think is totally possible for families as well. Then just share this and make everybody see, these dramatic things that Aaron went through pains to document for us. And with that, I would like to thank everybody for coming. Would like to thank you, Aaron, for this talk. I've seen an earlier version, but it was yet again stronger and more shocking. So thanks a lot for that.
Oh, sorry, I was reading the questions. Did you say something to me?
I did. Thank you very much.
All the questions. Oh, what? Who?
Yeah, no, I was just saying you had a really cool haircut in that one picture in the beginning. No, I was saying thank you very much for this really engaging talk. And
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for hosting me. And if anyone wants to come to Timor-Leste in October.
Right. I didn't actually put the slide up. That's right. We're still planning to go to Timor. And we're going to see blue whales and sperm whales, because last year we just missed the sperm whales, and then the week after they had like all these sperm whales. So this year we're not going to miss them. And dolphins and dugongs, and you're going to be with Aaron in person. So do contact us on that. And have a nice evening or rest of the day wherever you are in the world. Stay safe, and thanks again for joining, Aaron.
Thank you, Simon. Thanks so much for having me and hosting this.